Well, hello, ladies, gentlemen, and everyone listening in to tonight's broadcast of VORW Radio International, Voice of the Report of the Week. Coming out to you this Thursday, the 20th of November, 2025. This program is transmitted to you on the international shortwave frequency of 9705 kilohertz, with 300 kilowatts of power from Taiwan for listeners in East Asia. Thank you so much for tuning in, dear listener. Hope everyone out there tuned in right now is feeling and doing all right, and I wish you good reception conditions. Before we get into the program itself, there are two brief points that I would like to establish first. On a technical note, I received some good news, finally, from radio station KNLS, which is over in Alaska, in the United States. This has been a little bit of a saga of sorts. I mentioned this in the first broadcast, that there were some interference issues with them. As it turned out, there really wasn't as much interference as was feared, but either way, it was something that was still trying to be worked out. So this week, finally, I received formal confirmation from both KNLS as well as the FCC that they have made a frequency change. So the Russian service of KNLS is no longer on 9705 kilohertz. They have moved frequencies to 9860 kilohertz. So what that means is that this frequency, 9705 kilohertz, should now be 100% clear when my broadcast is on the air. Now, like I said, for listeners across much of Asia, that was never a problem to begin with, but for any listeners out there in the Russian Far East, or in listeners in some of the more fringe areas, like I know there were some listeners down in Perth, Australia, that were reporting hearing some of the Russian broadcast instead. That should free things up in that regard, and the reception should be much, much better for everyone. So this was something that we've been working on since October. It took a little while to really get all straightened out because of the bureaucratic process, which was compounded by the government shutdown here, but everything finally got worked out, and 9705 kilohertz should be clear. Secondly, on a more personal note, I wanted to take a moment, dear listeners, to sincerely extend my gratitude to each and every one of you who has either taken the time out of your day or night to correspond with this broadcast, or merely to take the time out of your day to sit by your radio set and listen in. I've been doing this radio program of mine for about 11 years now, and while this transmission has only been on the air for 4 weeks, I don't say this with exaggeration. Without a shadow of a doubt, this is the greatest transmission I have ever done. And there's a reason, a very simple reason why I say that, because of you, the listener, and all of the wonderful feedback that has come in from listeners around the world. Truly touching to see the vast variety of listeners all over East Asia and beyond that hear this broadcast every Thursday evening. To see even in just a few weeks' time the listener community that has been built through this new airing, and the depth of feedback that has come in as well. This has exceeded every expectation I ever had for this airing. And I hope you all know, if you're out there listening in right now, how much your listenership means to me. As I often say in the broadcasts I do to North America, and I will reiterate here, I don't do this radio show to sit here and listen to myself talk. I do it for you, the listener. And to you, the listener, I say most sincerely thank you. Thank you for tuning in. Thank you for writing in. You give me the motivation and the inspiration to get here to the microphone each and every week. If you enjoy this show, please give yourself credit, because it is you that makes it what it is today. With that said, for the remainder of the hour, the news in brief and following the news. Listener requested music. Dear listeners, please stay tuned. The news is next. An update on the situation in Iran. We've been covering this in every broadcast. And finally, some good news. Iran on Wednesday released a Marshall Islands flagged tanker with all its 21 crew members, days after Tehran seized the ship without explanation, the vessel's manager said. Tehran had no immediate comment on the release of the Talara, which marked the first ship seizure by Iran in months. The Middle East remains tense after Iran's 12-day war with Israel in June, as concerns remain over the Islamic Republic's nuclear program. Cyprus-based Columbia Ship Management said the crew were safe and in good spirits. We have informed their families, and the vessel is now free to resume normal operations. Ship tracking data analyzed by the Associated Press now showed the Talara traveling away from Iran. Although data also suggested Iranian authorities offloaded its cargo of high-sulfur gas oil, and the ship was traveling in ballast. So it appears that Iran offloaded the cargo on Tuesday before letting the vessel leave. Iran's military seized the vessel last Friday as it traveled through the narrow Strait of Hormuz, the narrow mouth and choke point of the Persian Gulf, through which 20% of all oil traded passes through. The ship had been traveling from the United Arab Emirates onward to Singapore. So this was the first time in several years that Iran had seized any sort of vessel traveling through the Strait of Hormuz. And while this has been done in the past, what my principal concern was, of course, was for the safety of the crew of this ship. Because, mind you, there are all sorts of political and economic disputes and military disputes between Iran and many neighboring countries. But the crew members of this oil tanker, these are just normal, everyday people just trying to do their job. And as I was following this news story, the last thing I ever wanted to see was any of these sailors getting hurt or harmed in any way. Iran helped themselves to a little bit of free oil, but what matters most of all to me is that the crew is safe and sound. I'm sure they're a bit shaken up, understandably so, but the fact that they're all alive and unharmed is the most important thing. Well, staying in the Middle East with news that regrettably is not as good, the Israeli military carried out barrages of airstrikes in southern Lebanon on Wednesday on what it said were Hezbollah sites, including weapons storage facilities. This came after a drone strike earlier in the day killed one person and wounding several others. Meanwhile, after Israel reported its soldiers were fired on in southern Gaza, health officials in the territory said Israeli airstrikes killed at least 25 Palestinians in one of the deadliest days in Gaza since the October 10th ceasefire agreement took effect. Separately, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu traveled to a buffer zone in Syrian territory that Israel seized last year. But focusing most on Lebanon, Israel's military warned Wednesday it would strike targets in several villages in southern Lebanon, describing these villages as Hezbollah infrastructure. Israel's military said Hezbollah was working to reestablish itself and rebuild its capacity in southern Lebanon. It said weapons facilities were being re-established and thus being targeted. And earlier on Wednesday, an Israeli airstrike on a car in southern Lebanese village of Tiri killed one person and wounded 11, including students aboard a nearby school bus. The Lebanese Health Ministry and state-run national news agency said the school bus was passing near the car that was hit in the airstrike. Moving next to Indonesia, Indonesia's Mount Semeru, the highest peak on Java Island, has erupted on Wednesday, blanketing several villages with falling ash, prompting evacuations and leading authorities to raise the alert to the highest level. Mount Semeru in East Java province unleashed searing clouds of hot ash and a mixture of rock, lava, and gas, known as a pyroclastic flow, that traveled 7 kilometers down its slopes several times from midday to dusk, while a thick column of hot clouds rose 2 kilometers into the air, Indonesia's geology agency said in a statement.